The room went silent the moment she stood up, but it hadn't started that way. Just minutes before, the grand ballroom buzzed with excitement, laughter, and the low hum of whispered predictions. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars above polished marble floors, casting golden reflections over a crowd dressed in wealth and expectation. Every eye was fixed on the stage, where 20 men sat in a perfect line, each one more polished, more confident, and more carefully presented than the last. This wasn't just any event. It was the event. A spectacle that had taken over headlines for weeks. The world's youngest self-made billionaire, known for her sharp decisions and colder-than-ice reputation, had announced something no one expected: she would choose a husband, not through private meetings or quiet introductions, but through a public contest. It sounded like a fairy tale at first, but this was no fairy tale. It was business, strategy, curiosity, and perhaps, something deeper no one quite understood. The men on stage had been chosen after months of filtering. They were CEOs, athletes, influencers, heirs, each one bringing something impressive to the table. Their resumes alone could fill books. Their appearances looked like they had stepped straight out of magazine covers. Perfect jawlines, flawless grooming, expensive suits tailored so precisely they looked painted on. And they all believed they had a real chance. At the center of it all sat the billionaire herself, calm, composed, unreadable. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but not extravagant, as if she had no need to prove anything to anyone. Her name alone carried more weight than the entire room combined. People described her as brilliant, intimidating, and impossible to impress. For hours, she had listened. One by one, the contestants stood and spoke. Some talked about their achievements, their vision for the future, their plans for power and growth. Others tried humor, charm, or carefully crafted vulnerability. They spoke about partnership, success, shared empires, global influence. The audience applauded at all the right moments. Judges nodded. Cameras captured every smile, every confident glance. But she, barely reacted. Sometimes she gave a polite nod. Sometimes she simply watched, her expression unchanged, her eyes distant as if she were searching for something none of them were offering. And then, when the final man finished speaking, delivering a speech so smooth it sounded memorized down to the last breath, the host smiled brightly and turned toward her. "Well," he said, his voice echoing through the hall, "the moment everyone has been waiting for. Have you made your decision?" A ripple of anticipation spread instantly. The audience leaned forward. The contestants straightened their posture. Some adjusted their cuffs. Others flashed subtle, confident smiles, convinced their moment had arrived. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowly rose from her seat. And that was when everything changed. The soft scrape of her chair against the floor sounded louder than it should have. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate for a fraction of a second before focusing on her again. She took one step forward. Then another. Her heels echoed across the room, sharp, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Click, click, click. At first, everyone assumed she was walking toward the stage, toward the line of contestants waiting under the bright lights. That was the obvious choice. That was what made sense. But she didn't stop at the first man. He smiled at her, confident, ready, but she passed him without a word. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. She moved to the second. He straightened, preparing himself, but she kept walking. Then the third. The fourth. By the fifth, the audience began to whisper. By the 10th, the smiles on stage started to falter. Each step she took created a heavier silence, like something unseen was unfolding in front of them all. The men who had once looked untouchable now shifted slightly in their seats, their confidence cracking just enough to be noticed. She didn't look at their watches. She didn't look at their faces for long. It was as if she had already made up her mind, and none of them were part of it. The host blinked, unsure whether to follow or stay still. Even the judges exchanged uncertain glances. And still, she walked. Click, click, click. When she reached the end of the line, the lights dimmed slightly, unable to follow her perfectly anymore. The cameras scrambled to adjust. The crowd leaned, stretching their view toward the far edge of the hall where fewer people paid attention before. That was where he stood. Not under the spotlight. Not seated among the chosen 20. Just, standing quietly near the exit, as if ready to leave unnoticed. He looked different. Not in a dramatic way, but in the kind of way that only becomes obvious when placed next to perfection. His shirt was clean but slightly worn, the fabric soft from too many washes. His sleeves were rolled up unevenly. His shoes carried the faint marks of long days and hard work. There was no shine, no polish, no attempt to stand out. In his arms, he held a small child, a little girl, fast asleep, her cheek pressed gently against his shoulder. One of her tiny hands gripped his collar like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. He hadn't been watching the stage the way others had. His attention had been on her, adjusting her position carefully, making sure she was comfortable despite the noise and lights around them. He looked up only when the silence reached him. And then, suddenly, she was standing right in front of him. The entire room froze. "Why didn't you come forward?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the silence effortlessly. The man blinked, clearly caught off guard. For a moment, he glanced behind him, as if she might be speaking to someone else. But there was no one. He hesitated, shifting the child slightly in his arms so she wouldn't wake. "I wasn't here for that." A faint murmur moved through the audience. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I'm not a contestant," he said quietly. "I didn't sign up." The confusion in the room deepened. "Then why are you here?" one of the judges called out, unable to hold back any longer. The man gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "My daughter wanted to come," he said. "She saw the event on TV and kept talking about the lights, the dresses, everything." He glanced down at the sleeping girl, his expression softening. "I couldn't afford tickets, but I managed to get a pass through someone I know who works here." A few people in the audience exchanged looks. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. The billionaire studied him carefully. "What would you do," she asked slowly, "if you had everything?" The question seemed simple, but the way she asked it made it feel heavier, like it carried more meaning than the words themselves. The man didn't rush to answer. He looked down at his daughter again, brushing a loose strand of hair away from her face with a gentle movement that felt instinctive, practiced, real. Then he looked back at her. "I already do," he said. No dramatic pause. No attempt to impress. Just a quiet truth. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't the kind of answer they expected. It wasn't clever or ambitious or powerful. It was honest. The little girl stirred slightly, her tiny fingers tightening their grip on his shirt before relaxing again. The billionaire's gaze softened, just a little. "Are you sure?" she asked. He nodded. "She's enough," he replied, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. More than enough. Something changed in the air. It wasn't visible, but it was there, a subtle shift that moved through the room like a quiet realization. On the stage, the 20 men who had once been the center of attention now seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Their rehearsed words echoed faintly in comparison to the simple, unpolished truth that had just been spoken. The billionaire turned slowly, her eyes sweeping across the audience, the judges, the contestants. "All night," she said, her voice steady but carrying a new depth, "I've listened to people tell me what they can build, what they can achieve, what they can become. No one interrupted. I've heard about power. About growth. About success." She paused, letting the words settle. But not once did I hear someone talk about what they're willing to give up for someone else. Her gaze drifted back to the man. You didn't try to impress me, she said. He gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. I didn't know I was supposed to. A few quiet laughs slipped through the crowd, but they faded quickly. You didn't even try to be chosen, she continued. I wouldn't know how, he admitted. And that was the moment everything became clear. She smiled, not the polite, controlled smile she had worn all evening, but something softer, something real. That's exactly why I choose you, she said. The reaction was instant. Gasps, whispers, disbelief spreading like wildfire through the room. The host stared in shock. The judges looked at each other, unsure if they had heard correctly. The contestants on stage froze, their carefully built confidence collapsing in silence. The man's eyes widened. There must be a mistake, he said quickly. I have nothing to offer you. She shook her head gently. You have something none of them could prove, she replied. And what is that? He asked, still unsure, still standing as if he might wake up from this moment at any second. A heart that stays, she said. Even when life gets hard. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Tears filled his eyes, not dramatic or overwhelming, but quiet and genuine, the kind that come from being seen in a way you never expected. The little girl shifted again, opening her eyes just enough to look around. She noticed the lights, the crowd, the woman standing in front of them, and then she smiled, small and innocent, before resting her head back against her father's shoulder. And somehow, that simple moment said more than anything else that had happened that night. Because in a room full of perfection, ambition, and carefully constructed images, the billionaire hadn't chosen the most powerful man. She hadn't chosen the most handsome. She hadn't chosen the one who promised her the world. She chose the man who had already given his world to someone else, and meant it.